What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars walks onto a morning show set and refuses to play by the rules? When the carefully scripted questions get thrown out the window and a simple interview turns into something nobody saw coming. That's exactly what went down when Tom Cruise sat across from Michael Strahan on Good Morning America. And what started as a promotional appearance quickly became one of the most intense moments in morning television history. Before we get into this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think about celebrities standing their ground in interviews. Now let's dive into what really happened. The interview started normally enough. Tom Cruise walked onto the set with his usual energy, that trademark smile lighting up the studio. Michael Strahan greeted him warmly, the two shaking hands as the cameras rolled. The audience applauded. Everything seemed standard. Cruise was there to talk about his latest action film. Strahan settled into his chair, cards in hand, ready to guide the conversation. "Tom, great to have you here," Strahan opened. "Let's talk about this new film. You're doing your own stunts again. I hear you hung off the side of a plane at 40,000 feet. Cruise leaned forward, that focused intensity in his eyes. "We did? Yeah. It's about giving the audience something real, something they can feel. When you're actually up there, when the danger is genuine, it translates through the camera." "That's incredible," Strahan responded. "But I've got to ask, at what point do you think about the risk? You've got people who depend on you, productions that could shut down if something goes wrong. Does that ever make you second-guess these choices?" There was a pause. Just a brief one, but noticeable. Cruise's expression shifted slightly. "Michael, I appreciate the question, but I think there's a misunderstanding about what we do. This isn't recklessness. Every stunt is calculated. Every safety measure is in place. We have teams of professionals who plan these sequences for months, right?" "Absolutely," Strahan continued, "but there's still that element of, what if something goes wrong? We've seen accidents on film sets. Is there ever a moment where you think maybe it's not worth it?" Cruise sat back slightly. "Is that what you think? That what we do isn't worth it?" The shift in tone was subtle but present. Strahan sensed it, his posture adjusting. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just asking if you ever have doubts." "It's a legitimate question." "It is," Cruise agreed, "but the way you're framing it suggests that there's something irresponsible about pushing boundaries in filmmaking. That's not what this is about. This is about craft, about giving audiences experiences they can't get anywhere else." Strahan glanced down at his cards briefly. "Tom, I'm not trying to suggest you're being irresponsible. I'm just exploring the human side of it. You're a father. You've been in this industry for decades. Surely there's a part of you that weighs these decisions differently now. Why would you assume that?" Cruise's response came quickly. "Why would age or having children make me less committed to excellence? If anything, it makes me more determined to leave behind work that matters." The energy in the studio had shifted. Strahan maintained his professional demeanor, but there was a flicker of surprise in his expression. "I'm not questioning your commitment, Tom. Nobody questions that." "Then what are you questioning?" Cruise asked directly. "Because it feels like there's an implication in your questions that what I do is somehow problematic, that taking risks in service of storytelling is something I should be ashamed of." Strahan held up a hand in a calming gesture. "Tom, come on now. I'm asking the questions that viewers want answered. People are curious." "It's not an attack." "I didn't say it was an attack," Cruise replied evenly. "I'm simply pointing out that there's a perspective embedded in your questions that doesn't align with how I see my work. You're treating what I do like it's a hobby that's gotten out of hand, rather than a serious artistic choice." The audience had gone quiet. This wasn't the light segment they'd expected. Strahan tried to pivot. "Let's talk about the film itself then. The story, the character. What drew you to this role?" But Cruise wasn't ready to let it go. "Michael, can I ask you something? When you played football, when you were out there taking hits, putting your body on the line every week, did people constantly ask you if it was worth it? Did they question whether you should be doing something safer?" Strahan paused, clearly not expecting the turn. "That's different, Tom. Football's a sport. That's what you sign up for. And filmmaking is what I signed up for," Cruise countered. "The difference is that when athletes take risks, it's celebrated. It's part of the game. But when someone in my position commits to the same level of physical dedication, suddenly it's reckless. It's unnecessary." Strahan shifted in his seat. "I don't think that's fair. I'm not saying any of those things." "You didn't have to say them directly," Cruise responded. "They're implied in the framework of your questions. Morning television has a format. You've got talking points, angles you're supposed to hit. But I'm sitting here as someone who's dedicated my entire life to this craft, and I'm being treated like I need to justify why I care about doing things at the highest possible level." "Tom, I respect everything you've accomplished," Strahan said, his tone becoming firmer. "But part of my job is to ask the questions that people are thinking. And the reality is, when you're hanging off planes, people wonder about the why behind it. That's not disrespectful. That's journalism." Cruise leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Is it journalism, or is it sensationalism? Because there's a difference between genuinely exploring someone's artistic choices and turning their commitment into a spectacle. that you can pick apart for entertainment. The tension was palpable now. Strahan's co-hosts looked uncertain about whether to intervene. Strahan took a breath, weighing his next words carefully. I'm going to push back on that a little bit, Strahan said. We invited you here to talk about your film, to give you a platform to share your work with millions of viewers. That's not exploitation, that's opportunity. And if the questions are tougher than you'd like, well, that's part of being in the public eye. Tougher questions are fine. Cruz replied, I welcome tough questions. What I don't welcome is the underlying assumption that what I do needs to be defended, that passion and dedication are somehow character flaws rather than strengths. Strahan nodded slowly. All right, I hear you. But you've got to understand, from where I'm sitting, I'm trying to have a conversation that's interesting and relevant. If that means asking questions that challenge you a little bit, that's part of the dynamic. Challenge me about the work, Cruz said. Challenge me about the story we're telling, about the choices I made as an actor. But don't challenge me on whether I should care as much as I do. That's not up for debate. Strahan glanced off camera briefly, perhaps getting direction, then returned his focus to Cruz. Let me ask you this then. When you're making these films, what do you want audiences to take away from them? Beyond just the thrill, what's the deeper purpose? Cruz considered the question. I want them to believe that anything is possible. I want them to walk out of that theater feeling like they've experienced something that expanded their sense of what can be achieved. It's not about me. It's not about my ego. It's about creating moments that inspire people, that remind them that limits are often just illusions we accept. That's a beautiful sentiment, Strahan acknowledged. But you can see how, from an outside perspective, the focus tends to be on you, on Tom Cruise, the daredevil. Rather than on those deeper themes, I can see how the media chooses to frame it that way. Cruz responded, the edge returning to his voice. But that doesn't mean I have to accept that framing or participate in perpetuating it. You have a choice in how you conduct this interview, just like I have a choice in how I respond. Strahan's jaw tightened slightly. Are you saying I'm doing my job wrong? I'm saying that maybe the job, as it's currently defined, is part of the problem, Cruz said plainly. That statement hung in the air like a challenge. Strahan's expression hardened, the practiced smile completely gone now. So we're the problem. The people trying to have a conversation with you, we're the issue. I didn't say you personally, Cruz clarified, though his tone remained firm. I'm talking about a system that reduces everything to sound bites and controversy. That would rather focus on whether I'm crazy for doing a stunt than discuss why the stunt matters to the story. Tom, you can't sit here and act like you don't benefit from that system. Strahan shot back, leaning forward now. The reason people care about your stunts, the reason they show up to your movies, is because of the spectacle. You're not making small independent films. You're making blockbusters that are marketed on exactly the kind of coverage you're now criticizing. Cruz didn't flinch. There's a difference between marketing a film and having my artistic choices questioned as if they're symptoms of something wrong with me. You can promote the spectacle without implying that the person creating it is unhinged. I never said you were unhinged. Strahan protested. You asked if it was worth it, Cruz countered. You asked if I second-guess myself. Those questions come from a place of assuming there's something to second-guess, that the default position should be doubt rather than confidence in one's abilities. Strahan shook his head, clearly frustrated now. That's not fair, Tom. I asked those questions because they're human questions. Everyone has doubts. Everyone weighs risk versus reward. Acting like you're above that, like you never question yourself, that's not being authentic. That's being defensive. I'm not above anything, Cruz said, his voice rising slightly for the first time. But there's a difference between having private moments of reflection and being publicly interrogated about whether my life's work is justified. You don't know what conversations I have with myself, what doubts I wrestle with in private. But what I'm not going to do is perform those doubts for an audience so people can feel better about their own limitations. The studio had gone completely silent. Even the crew seemed frozen, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this play out. Strahan's co-host started to interject, but Strahan held up a hand, keeping his eyes locked on Cruz. So now we're talking about other people's limitations? Strahan asked, his voice sharp. You think people who don't jump out of planes have limitations? That's pretty condescending. Tom, that's not what I said, and you know it. Cruz replied. I'm talking about the cultural impulse to tear down anyone who refuses to accept conventional boundaries. It's easier to mock someone for trying than to examine why you stopped trying yourself. Wow, Strahan said, sitting back with a bitter laugh. So this is what we're doing now. You're going to psychoanalyze me on live television because I asked you a few tough questions. You made it personal first, Cruz pointed out. You brought up my age, my children, implied that my priorities should have shifted. You turned this into a conversation about who I am as a person rather than what I do as an artist. I'm just responding in kind. Strahan's jaw clenched. I asked about your personal life because that's what people connect with. They don't just want to hear about camera angles and stunt coordination. They want to understand the human being behind the action hero. Then ask me about the human being, Cruz said. Ask me what drives me, what scares me, what I hope to accomplish before I'm done. Don't ask me to justify my existence or validate my choices through the lens of what you think is appropriate for someone my age. I never said anything about appropriate, Strahan countered. You didn't have to, Cruz repeated, the frustration evident now. It's in the subtext of every question. It's in the surprise on your face that I'm not slowing down. It's in the way you keep circling back to risk, as if the only reasonable response to getting older is to become more cautious, more conservative, more afraid. Strahan leaned forward, his voice dropping but intensifying. You want to know what I really think? I think you're so locked into this image you've built that you can't separate the character from the person anymore. I think the stunts aren't about the audience or the art. They're about proving something to yourself. And when someone asks you an honest question about it, you can't handle it because it gets too close to something you don't want to examine. The accusation hit hard. Cruz went very still, his expression unreadable for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but carried an unmistakable edge. You don't know me, Michael. You don't know what I think about when I'm alone, what I'm trying to prove or not prove. You've had a few conversations with me over the years at events, done a couple of interviews. That doesn't give you insight into my psychology. Maybe not, Strahan conceded, but I know what I see. And what I see is someone who gets defensive the moment anyone suggests that maybe, just maybe, there's more to unpack than you're willing to admit. Or maybe, Cruz said slowly, what you're seeing is someone who's tired of being treated like a curiosity instead of a professional. You were an athlete, you said it yourself. Imagine if every interview you did, people questioned whether football was healthy for you, whether you should reconsider your commitment to the sport, whether your dedication was actually just compensation for some deeper issue. How long before you'd get tired of defending yourself? Strahan considered this, and for a moment it seemed like the temperature might drop, but then he shook his head. The difference is, I retired. I moved on to other things. I didn't keep trying to prove I could still take hits in my 50s, because you couldn't. Cruz said bluntly, your body wouldn't let you. But if it could, if you were still capable of performing at the highest level, are you telling me you wouldn't? That you'd just walk away from something you loved because society decided you were too old? Strahan's eyes flashed. That's not the same thing, and you know it. It's exactly the same thing, Cruz insisted. The only difference is that in my field, if you take care of yourself, if you maintain your skills, you can continue. And that bothers people because it holds up a mirror to their own choices, their own compromises. There it is again, Strahan said, his voice tight. This superiority complex where everyone else has compromised and you're the only one still pure in your dedication. You realize how that sounds, right? I realize that you're twisting my words to fit a narrative. Cruz responded. I never said I was superior to anyone. I said that I'm committed to my work and that I don't apologize for that commitment. If that makes you uncomfortable, that's something you need to examine, not me. Strahan stood up suddenly, the movement startling. You know what, Tom? I think we're done here. Cruz remained seated, looking up at him calmly. Are we, or are you just uncomfortable with where this conversation went? I'm uncomfortable with you coming on my show and insulting me, Strahan said, his voice raised now. I'm uncomfortable with you turning a simple interview into some kind of personal attack on my character and my profession. I haven't attacked anything, Cruz said, still seated, still calm. I've defended myself against assumptions and implications. If that feels like an attack, maybe that's because you're realizing those assumptions weren't as neutral as you thought. Strahan pointed at him, his hand shaking slightly with anger. You don't get to come in here and tell me how to do my job. You don't get to lecture me about journalism and integrity when you've spent your entire career controlling every aspect of your public image. I control my image because I learned a long time ago what happens when you don't, Cruz replied, finally standing up to meet Strahan's gaze. The media will create whatever narrative serves them, truth be damned. So yes, I'm protective of my work and how it's presented. That's not a character flaw, that's survival. They stood facing each other now, the cameras capturing every second of the confrontation. The producers had to be losing their minds, but neither man seemed to care any more about the audience or the format or the consequences. Strahan took a breath, clearly trying to regain some composure. Survival. You're one of the biggest movie stars in the world. You're not surviving, Tom, you're thriving, and you're acting like you're some kind of victim because I asked you standard interview questions. Standard questions built on problematic assumptions, Cruz corrected. And I'm not claiming victimhood, I'm claiming agency. There's a difference. I have the right to push back when the framing is wrong. The framing is only wrong because it doesn't match the story you want to tell. Strahan countered, his voice still elevated. You want everyone to see you as this dedicated artist, this visionary who's misunderstood. But maybe, just maybe, you're exactly what you appear to be. A guy who likes the adrenaline rush and has convinced himself it's profound. Cruz's eyes narrowed. And maybe you're exactly what you appear to be, someone who traded in their passion for a paycheck and now sits in judgment of people who didn't make that choice. The words landed like a slap. Strahan's face registered shock, then anger, then something closer to hurt. You're way out of line. Am I? Cruz asked, not backing down. You've been out of line this entire interview, making assumptions about my motivations, my mental state, my parenting. But now that I return the favor, suddenly there are boundaries. Strahan's co-host finally stood up, trying to step between them. Guys, maybe we should take a breath here. We can go to commercial and regroup. No, Strahan said firmly, not taking his eyes off Cruz. We're going to finish this conversation. Tom wants to have it out. Let's have it out. Cruz nodded slowly. Fine, say what you really want to say. Strahan stepped closer, his voice low but intense. I think you hide behind the work. I think all this talk about art and dedication and pushing boundaries is cover for the fact that you don't know who you are when you're not on a set or in front of a camera. I think the stunts are the only time you feel real, and that's not healthy. Tom, that's not something to celebrate. The accusation hung between them, raw and unfiltered. Cruz stood perfectly still for a long moment, his expression giving nothing away. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, but cold. You think you've figured me out based on what? A couple of interviews, articles you've read. You don't know anything about my life. Michael, you don't know what I feel or don't feel, what makes me real or doesn't. Then tell me I'm wrong, Strahan challenged. Tell me that when you go home at night, when there's no crew around and no cameras rolling, you're genuinely content. Tell me you don't need the validation of the next stunt, the next impossible feat. Cruz's jaw tightened. What I need or don't need isn't your concern, and it's certainly not something I'm going to dissect for your entertainment or your audiences. You want vulnerability? Go watch a reality show. This is supposed to be an interview about a film, not a therapy session. You made it more than that the moment you started attacking how I do my job, Strahan fired back. I didn't attack how you do your job, Cruz said, his patience clearly wearing thin. I questioned the assumptions built into your questions. There's a difference. But you keep conflating the two because it's easier to be offended than to actually listen to what I'm saying. Strahan laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm listening, Tom. I'm hearing you loud and clear. You're saying that everyone else is the problem. The media is the problem. I'm the problem. Anyone who dares to question you is the problem. But you're perfect. You're dedicated. You're the last true artist in a world of sellouts and compromises. That's a cartoon version of what I said. Cruz responded, his voice rising again. I never claimed perfection. I never said everyone else was a sellout. What I said, what I've been saying this entire time, is that I'm tired of having my commitment questioned as if it's pathological. I'm tired of people like you deciding what's appropriate for someone my age, what level of risk is acceptable, what constitutes healthy versus unhealthy passion. People like me, Strahan repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You mean people who ask questions, people who don't just accept everything you say at face value. I mean people who think they have the right to diagnose someone they don't know. Cruz shot back. You just spent 5 minutes telling me what you think my psychological issues are, based on nothing but your own projections. And when I defend myself, you act like I'm the one being unreasonable. The studio was electric with tension now. Crew members were frantically signaling to producers, trying to figure out if they should cut the feed. But the two men were locked in, neither willing to back down. Strahan ran a hand over his face, frustration evident in every movement. You want to know what this really is? You can't handle that your carefully constructed image is being challenged. You've spent so long controlling the narrative that the moment someone pushes back, even a little, you fall apart. I'm not falling apart, Cruz said, his voice dangerously quiet now. I'm standing my ground. There's a difference. You're used to guests who smile and nod and go along with whatever narrative you've prepared. I'm not that person. I never have been. No, you're the person who walks off sets and gets into fights with directors and thinks the whole world revolves around your vision. Strahan said, the words tumbling out now, with real heat behind them. You're difficult, Tom. Everyone knows it. They just don't say it to your face because you're Tom Cruise and you have power. But I'm saying it now. You're difficult, you're controlling, and you can't handle the slightest bit of criticism. Cruz stared at him for a long moment, something flickering across his face. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, almost eerily so. You're right about one thing. I am difficult. I demand excellence from myself and from everyone around me. I don't accept mediocrity. I don't settle for good enough, and I don't apologize for having standards. If that makes me difficult in your book, I'll wear that label proudly. Of course you will, Strahan said bitterly, because you've turned every flaw into a virtue in your mind. Your control issues are dedication. Your inability to accept criticism is integrity. Your need for constant validation through increasingly dangerous stunts is artistry. It's all just rebranding. Tom, it's all just spin. And this, Cruz gestured between them. What is this? You ambushing a guest with pop psychology and personal attacks. Is that journalism? Is that integrity? Strahan's face flushed. I didn't ambush anyone. You came here to promote a film. I asked you questions about your choices, and you turned it into this. I responded honestly to dishonest questions, Cruz corrected. And that bothered you because you expected me to play along, to give you the sound bites you wanted. When I didn't, When I pushed back, you made it personal. So don't pretend this is on me." They stood there, both breathing hard, the weight of everything said and unsaid pressing down on the studio. Finally, Strahan shook his head slowly. "I think you should leave." Cruz didn't move immediately. "Is that what you want? To end this by kicking me out? That's how you want this to look?" "I want you to leave before we both say things we can't take back," Strahan said, his voice strained. "This interview is over." Cruz studied him for another moment, then nodded once, sharply. "Fine, thank you for having me." The words were formal, almost mocking in their politeness. He unclipped his microphone, handed it to a stunned crew member, and turned toward the exit. But before he could take more than a few steps, Strahan called after him. "Tom?" Cruz stopped, turning back slowly. Strahan's expression was complicated, anger mixed with something that might have been regret. "For what it's worth, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." Cruz held his gaze for a long moment. "I already found it, Michael. That's what you don't understand. I'm not searching, I'm not lost. I'm exactly where I want to be, doing exactly what I want to do. The fact that you can't accept that you need there to be something wrong with that picture, that's your issue, not mine." But that, he walked off the set, leaving Strahan standing alone as the cameras continued to roll. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only when Strahan finally turned to the camera, his professional mask slipping back into place with visible effort. "We'll be right back," he said, his voice tight. The show cut to commercial, but the damage was done. What was supposed to be a simple promotional interview had turned into one of the most explosive confrontations in morning television history, and everyone who witnessed it knew that this moment would be replayed, analyzed, and debated for years to come. So what do you think about what went down between Tom Cruise and Michael Strahan? Was Tom right to defend himself, or did he take it too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe for more breakdowns of the most intense celebrity moments caught on camera.